amongst those who had a bit of a discussion around being double vaccinated and supporting our community to get vaccinated as soon as possible. It's really pleasing to see the level of uptake in Selwyn, so well over the 90%, and we've been in the top handful of people in the country there. Congratulate the DHB for the work that they've done and our local providers around connecting with our people as well. There are still pockets of people who have found it difficult to get vaccinated, and whether that's been because of language or isolation, as well as other reasons, there's a continued push to have that. But just to show some leadership for our district, it'd be great to be able to take a photo together. We've had discussions about this. Yeah, for those that are either double vaccinated or intend to get their vaccinations done, we'll just take a photo and we'll get our comms team to chuck 100% on the front vaccination, and we'll use that through our social media channel. So if I could ask Stephen to come and take a photo, and invite any councillors that want to come and be a part of this now. This is a workspace, you don't need to put our mask on, but you're welcome to put your mask on if you'd like for the messaging. The optics of it, that's probably worth thinking about. Yes, thank you, Nicole. We've got a number of apologies from Councillor Hassan, Councillor Epihar and Councillor Lemon. So I'm happy to move that we accept those apologies. Thank you, Alexander and Bland. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, declare it carried. The identification of any extraordinary business, I haven't been made aware of any. Tim, you're not aware of any? No. Conflicts of interest that people will need to raise that haven't been already identified on the register? None from anyone. So we move into today's agenda. There's no public forum today. We have confirmation of minutes from the previous meeting on the 27th of October. And mover and seconder for those minutes. Thank you, Sophie and Malcolm. Is there any discussion on those minutes? No. All those in favour that they be recorded as true and correct, say aye. Aye. Against, declare it carried. Any discussion or any matters falling out from those minutes? No. I did like this morning Annalisa's way of sort of making sure that the matters that we expected staff to report back on at a future report were captured before the meeting was closed. Naomi and Therese, I thought that was quite a good way of just ensuring that the things that councillors raised were captured. So we might look to do that at the end of the meeting just to ensure if there's things that need to be added to the list, we have them at the end of the meeting rather than trying to remember them a couple of weeks later. So we move then to the first item on the agenda, which is on page 19. It's tab 8, and it's the development of Selwyn Strategic Heritage Plan and establishment of an interim Selwyn Heritage Contestable Fund. And Denise, welcome along to the meeting.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Today I'm talking with you about plans that are underway for protecting and celebrating Selwyn's history. Before I specifically speak to the report in front of you, I just want to share with you something of historical significance with Council. Yesterday we received the formal loan documentation confirming the loan of 2 significant taonga to Te Ara Aotea. A Pounamu hei mātou, which is a greenstone pendant shaped in the form of a fish hook, and a Patu tuna, a fish club. Both taonga are several hundred years old. The hei mātou will be in our care from mid-November until March 2022, when it will be swapped out for the Patu tuna. The loan of these taonga is significant for a number of reasons. The taonga have only ever been loaned out twice before. For inclusion in the Te Māori exhibition in the 1980s and the Mō Tātou exhibition in the early 2000s. Secondly, the museum wanted to acknowledge the mana of the taonga and their relationship to Tauamutu and Selwyn district. This is the first time these taonga will be returned to the district. And thirdly, Canterbury Museum is committed to continuing to strengthen its relationship with mana whenua and Selwyn District Council, and to making cultural material heritage, mā tauranga knowledge and rangahau research accessible to the community from which it was sourced. This is a great illustration of the importance of protecting and celebrating our history and our heritage. Now to the report in front of you today.
Denise, just before moving on, I think that's a really significant move, and Tauamutu, as this was going on, expressed their delight at these taonga being able to be housed in Selwyn, Waikirikiri, and being a lot closer to their Tauamutu home. So 2 of the most significant pieces of taonga for Tauamutu now being able to be here on, I guess, a rotating basis on loan from the museum is really significant. So well done to you and the team and those from Tauamutu who have pressed for this. I don't know if anyone else would like to say anything about that, but worth acknowledging, and thank you very much. I think we've spent a lot of time focusing on the building and on the build process and on the health and safety around that and on the design, but actually what the building Te Ara Aotea will host and hold, not only the people that will get to experience it and perform there, but also the taonga that it will hold for our districts. Very significant, so thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I too would congratulate staff with working with Canterbury Museum to achieve this. I think it is an outstanding result, and hopefully the first of many exchanges, many loans we'll see, and not only for Te Ara Aotea, but as an enabler across the district. Canterbury Museum is the museum for Canterbury, and it's nice to see that some of us taonga are able to come out to the rest of Canterbury. So I think it's an amazing result, and it's really, really pleasing, and it's a great recognition of the role that Te Ara Aotea will play in our community as a place where it can help enable that.
Yes, I agree with all the comments that have been made, but it goes a little further than that, and that the taonga is being gifted on a loan basis to us, not simply because we have the Te Ara Aotea Centre, but that we have a change in philosophy, and that we are now starting to recognise that we do have to look after our history and taonga. And for that reason, I would imagine that in some ways, the Maori community are congratulating us for taking the step that we're about to take today.
With your indulgence, you wish, that might be appropriate for me to just briefly discuss what those two items are. So there's the Porotaka He Mātou, which the He Pounamu, or greenstone pendant, is a celebrated Ngāi Tahu taonga treasure, and it was found near Te Waihora, Lake Ellesmere in 1938. So could have belonged to a chiefly person from around here. The He is not only a stunningly beautiful stone, it is also a marvel of Ngāi Tahu artistry in its making. It was an icon of the exhibition Te Māori that displayed the art of iwi Māori across the world and around Aotearoa in the 1980s. The ornament is several hundred years old, shaped like a mātou or fishhook, but its porotaka, rounded form, could also perhaps suggest a bird. It is thought to symbolise knowledge, made to adorn a tahuka, a person of special qualities and expertise. The patu tuna. The ancient patu tuna, or eel striker, was hauled out of Te Waihora, Lake Ellesmere in the 1930s. It marks the importance of the hiki tuna, the harvest of migrating eels in the maramataka, the seasonal cycle of Ngāi Tahu. The patu is many centuries old. The chevron style of its carving is a link to the art that tangata whenua brought from Hawaii, their homeland in the Eastern Pacific. The ancestors probably used the patu in rituals that began the autumn harvest of tuna. In former times, the lake would teem with mature adults heading for their Pacific Ocean breeding grounds. Thousands would be netted in komu, shingle channels, as they sought their escape to the sea across Kaitoriti Spit. The catch provided an abundance of food for storage and trade.
Thanks, Denise. Maybe we could have that commentary included in the minutes and just share a copy with today's after this would be great. Thank you. Now the development of the Selwyn Strategic Heritage Plan.
As part of Council's long-term plan deliberations, it formed a view that there were a large number of activities or initiatives related to Selwyn's history and heritage that Council could fund and was being asked to consider funding. Council determined that it was timely, or perhaps that is more accurately about time, that it formed a medium to long-term view about what Council should be doing in regards to protecting and celebrating Selwyn's heritage. Why this matters and how it needs to go about this. A broad range of views exist, and strategic planning presents an opportunity to solicit the various views and incorporate consideration of the range into the process. Council was aware that there is a lot of groups and individuals wanting money now to do something in the broad realm of protecting and celebrating Selwyn's history. On that basis, Council did put aside $50,000 as an interim or transitional funding arrangement in the current financial year, so that there would be some immediate financial support able to be provided to groups while Council forms its longer, more strategic view. While Council has committed $50,000 funding for the year 2020-2021, this may at some point require further consideration by Council. Actually, I think the dates are wrong, 2021-2022. This may at some point require further consideration by Council, given that the timing of the strategic plan to be tabled is not going to take place until July 2022, and that will mean that there are funding implications that will not be able to be responded to until the following financial year. So in conclusion, the report describes the initial project brief proposed for the strategic plan. The report describes the interim or transitional funding goals and timelines. And the report also presents terms of reference for the committee that will oversee the interim transitional funding. It is noted that both Councillors Bland and Mugford have already been appointed by Council to represent the Council on this committee until the 2022 elections.
Great, thank you, Denise. Thanks for the report. It's great to see action, what are we, 3 months on now from when the council decision was made about wanting to have a lot more focus on the heritage area across Selwyn. And as Jeff's already said, there's the pretty broad range of groups and things to be looked after and acknowledged. And the flexibility to do something this year, but also think long term about what we might do. So I support the plan. I think there's some things that are going to take a wee bit of time to work through. So we're not looking to rush it. I guess there was a couple of questions that I had around just the timing of decision making and our ability to have a plan kind of for consultation alongside a funding decision through the annual plan, and how those two things, what are we expecting to go to the community with through an annual plan process next year, so that they could make a decision on whether they will or won't fund it. And in here it's kind of, it talks about that coming to us in July, August, which is after that date. And then secondly, the makeup of the committee mentions Ngāi Tahu, and I think we need to be more, a representation should be Runanga based, not Ngāi Tahu based. And so if there's going to be representation, it's not Ngāi Tahu at all. It's Te Taumutu Runanga explicitly. And if we want to think about the Runanga who have Waikirikiri Selwyn as part of their rohi, then it should also reference Ngāi Tuahuriri. And I don't know what conversations have been had with either of those two Runanga, but I think it would be premature of us to appoint one over the other at this stage. But it shouldn't be with Ngāi Tahu. So, yeah, thank you for that. There'll be some other questions and comments for councillors, then we'll come back to you at the end, Denise, and cover off on the things that are raised. Thank you. Mark, Jeff and Nicole.
Thank you. And I support the intent of this report and the intent of the establishment of the plan and the interim heritage contestable fund in the committee. I too had questions which I circulated earlier in the week around the same points the Mayor has just made, that one reading of the report could indicate that we were going to make the $50,000 sort of in the next financial year, which it needs to be made clear that that decision has not been made, that $50,000 has been allocated in this financial year and no commitment has been given for any subsequent year. That's not to say there can't be submissions and council support, but it just needs to be clear that the current fund that they're administering is for this financial year, and potentially some of it could be carried forward. but there is no funding beyond this financial year. The second question I had was around the committee membership, and I too looked at the iwi representation, the Runanga representation, and I thought, well, we really need two, one from each of the Runanga with oversight in our area. But I also looked at it where it says on page 22 of our agenda that the two councillors and the iwi representative would be ex officio. And that surprised me, because if this is a committee of council, I expected that the councillors on this committee would be full members of the committee, not ex officio. The mayor is often ex officio of the committee because he, as of right, belongs to all committees, but that the councillors and the Runanga representatives should be full members, not ex officio members. So I'm wondering if we have the ability to amend those terms of reference or the terms and committees of the committee to include two Runanga representatives, one from each Runanga, and the fact that the Runanga representatives and the councillors would be full members of the committee, not ex officio. The mayor, as of right, is ex officio, and he can speak whether he wants to be a full member or just an ex officio member for himself. But I believe that the two councillors and the Runanga representatives should be full members of the committee. And I did raise the question of the timing of the report back with respect to the long-term plan, and it is what it is. The timing is just unfortunate, but we can still consider some funding in the annual plan process next year if that's needed. It could be that given the timing of getting this committee up and running, that the $50,000 may well last for the 2 years rather than 1 year, but I don't want to prejudice any future discussion on that funding.
Thanks, Mark. Jeff.
Yes, I agree with Mark and those points that he's made. They're well made, actually, but I just don't want us to getting hung up on this $50,000. I mean, you can't build too many hockey pitches. You can't build too many community centres, hospitals for $50,000. So we look at it as a $50,000 as just a little bit of money, pin money for the organisations that are clinging to the historical values that we have in this community, and let's not get too hung up on 50,000. We're going to be lending millions, not thousands, in the future. And because we've left it for so long, it's going to take quite some organising to find out exactly how much money we will be needing in the future. So I think that's a little bit, it's up in the clouds a little bit, as they say, as to how much money we're going to need. We're just going to need a whole lot of thought. We're going to need to have very good communication with our communities. And I would like to move that we receive this report.
Jeff, happy for you to be the mover, but are you happy with the three recommendations that are there? We're not just receiving the report.
Yep.
There's a preliminary project brief, there's a terms and conditions, possibly as amended, as Mark has suggested, which again makes sense to me, but there may be other councillors that think differently and see the establishment of the interim Selwyn Community Heritage Fund.
When I first spoke, I said I agreed with Mark in your comments, and I do agree with them. And yes, those amendments may well be made. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Jeff. And Nicole.
So we've got a current Heritage Fund as well already. So that will still be kept as a separate. Because with the district plan, I'm on the historic heritage hearings, and that obviously has been brought up about funding for heritage. So I'm actually just questioning whether I've assumed that this is all right for me to be commenting on this piece, but I just need to have that, if that can be minuted that I've asked that, and that's been fine.
Happy for Tim to give some advice, but this is a decision on funding separate than the district plan process completely.
Yeah, that's what I would have thought.
You know, I agree with Mayor Sam. I don't think there's any issues.
No,
with
that's I had assumed that would be the case, but I had to make sure that it was clarified.
Not to say in the future that we may look at whether these two funds may come together, but at this point, I think this is just entirely separate.
And then just leading from that, you've talked about so in paragraph preparing this plan with engagement of, and you've listed locally we Kaitiaki communities, blah, blah, blah. And then on the actual, where have I seen that further on the track when you've talked again about the different groups, refer to stakeholders. So just looking at the ones who are heritage listed and etc. in the plan, whether those groups will, people that actually have heritage assets will be consulted as part of this plan as well.
The Mr. Acting Chief Executive, I think, raised my point was there is going to be two committees very similarly named. And it does seem logical that they would be combined. They seem to be very similar in function on the work program, at least. And it may be confusing to our community to have two separate committees. So that would be my worst point. Second point probably is just raising a concern that when we do generate new committees and have attached budget lines, they never ever stay on day one. And so there is an additional impost on the ratepayer going to be coming out of this. And just have to be careful how we tread this. What I'm referencing it to is our significant levy increases to the Canterbury Museum, which are coming up. So I think we need to be mindful of that, but maybe integrating the museum and the heritage rate into one may be sensible. Thinking about what that look. And incidentally, while we're on the point, I think it would be timely to have a report from our representative on the museum committee as to what progress has been made on that situation as well. So thank you.
Yeah, good point, Grant. We'll follow up with a museum representative for a future briefing session back to us. Thank you. Bob?
Yeah, I agree with Mark's points. I think they're quite valid, but I've got to remind you that this fund is the interim fund is to get ready as soon as we possibly can, because a lot of our small heritage groups, museums and that, are really struggling for their everyday funding. So to me, it's a really important start, and that it's not put as part of what we could have in the future. This is the one part that we need right now. The rest will follow after that.
Sorry, I'm sorry I'm having a second bite of this, but I just checked my notes and found that there was an additional question I had. Again, on the bottom of page 22, it says the chairman will be elected for the members of the committee for the initial period until 30th of September 2022. I wonder if that really needs to be in the terms and conditions, because a committee can elect its chair and change its chair at any meeting of the committee. I'm not quite sure what the intention was of having that period of interim chairmanship, or is that implying that it is a councillor, likely to be a councillor, and it's up to the election period? If that's what's intended, then that could be better stated in those terms and conditions. I'm quite happy to see it being a councillor, and that would make sense to that comment.
I will ask Kelvin to respond to the query regarding the timing and the consultation associated with rates. The intent with this report was that the plan wouldn't be available until that consultation process had concluded, and therefore the timing wouldn't align with a funding being obtained next financial year. But I'll get Kelvin to speak to that specifically. In terms of, there seems to be a level of agreement around the Runanga composition on the committee and full membership versus ex officio, and so I don't need to comment further about that. You're correct, Councillor, in terms of the assumption was made that a councillor would chair that, and so there may be a view as to whether or not that is appropriate, but if it's deemed that it is appropriate, then your suggested wording changes would need to happen. Councillor Reid, you talked about the need to consult with those who owned heritage assets, so that's noted. And I think that was the bulk of it. Kelvin, did you want to comment?
Regards to annual plan, yes, we could, that'll be included as a consultation matter within that around funding. We don't necessarily need to have a full plan to enable it to occur, because we could be looking to increase, as Mark has said, that it's a 1 year piece at this stage. We'd need to put budget in place for the following years. Just a reminder, in terms of targeted rates, we are sitting very, very close to that 30% cap. So we're working through in my own mind at the moment how we might handle our rates that in some way deals with that.
Yeah, as well, Grant was saying about the two committees, I personally believe that they should remain separate, because to me they're both for heritage, but for totally different things. And I think that if you were to join the two together, we might get that one part of them would get a lot more money than the other, and I think it could get quite difficult. Whereas at the moment it's for business, for buildings and trees, which is quite, it's quite easy to work out, but they're not adding all the other things into it. And I think maybe that they both need a name change or something like that, but I'd like to see them separate.
If I could just note that Councillor Miller's point was noted, I think that certainly the intent is to consider an amalgamation of the funds and a larger pool of funds, and this is an interim fund, so it's best to be kept separate in that capacity. So but yeah, happy if it gets called something different. I think it is not exactly the same, but it does both have heritage in it.
Thank you. I think setting up this group enables some time to work that through, and clarity around the names will be important, rather than people thinking there's two bites at the same cherry when they're actually completely different. So A, B and C out there, Jeff has moved, and seconder for that, Bob. The changes, we're not going to specify there, they sit within the report, but as identified during the meeting, the mayor will continue to be ex officio, but the councillors and the Runanga reps will be full members of the committee. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried. Thank you, Denise. The next item is on tab 9, page 25. It's private plan change 63, rezoning of land in Darfield. There's A, B, C and D, which I won't read out to everyone. Does someone want to move and second that report, or would you like to wait for a presentation on it? Happy to move. Bob, seconded Jenny. Is there any discussion on the paper that sits before us? Councillor Miller?
I guess in the context of this hearing, but also in the wider context of the explosive growth we're seeing, looking at things we've done well and perhaps things we want to look back in hindsight and say things that didn't go so good. One of the great success stories of iZone is the delineation from residential by having the state highway in the way. This subdivision here, although it's further up Horndon Road, starts to come down towards our industrial area of Darfield. I'm just concerned that we don't repeat the mistakes of having residential right next to industrial. So I'm sure the staff are aware of making buffer zones, but we need to defend those or re-look at the Melbourne area plan to make sure that our industrial growth is protected, particularly around noise and if larger scale industry, which may move into Darfield. And I think the same could be applied to Leaston in some respects. That some of those smaller towns which are now seeing growth, which we hadn't expected, are going to have associated industrial growth. So if that could be, I know it's not directly to this, but that could be noted.
Yeah, agree, Grant, and that's sort of part of that future strategic direction. So thank you for raising it today. It's those size towns that you've mentioned as well. The industrial stuff was on the edge of town, and now it's actually being surrounded with the amount of growth that we've had. So thank you for raising again today. Any further comments or questions people had? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Declare it carried. And the next item is plan change 66, tab 10, page 69.
Can I just seek clarification, Mr. Mayor, before we take this one? I can't recall whether this is also a submission on the proposed district plan or not, and where that leaves those of us who are district plan commissioners on this, receiving, accepting the recommendations here, because it would put council in an awkward spot. If we have to step back from this, we won't have enough of a quorum to actually pass it.
If I may respond through Mayor Sam. In my view, this is more of a procedural matter rather than making a substantive decision. The commissioner has considered the submissions and come to a decision. So I welcome another view, Ben, if you've got one, but my suggestion would be that you can remain at the table. I think that you have identified that you are a commissioner, as another councillor may want to do, but councillors may want to do, but that's probably sufficient in my view. Ben, have you got a view on that?
No, I'd agree with that, Tim, and if worst case, we can put Councillor Hassan on that particular PDP zoning request.
I guess the two the processes that are considering the same item, but as you've raised, Tim, we're not the decision makers around the hearing and understanding the pros and cons and sitting in that same seat. If councillors are uncomfortable with the place that they're in, then feel free to step back from the table. But you've had the advice from Tim, and I can understand why we would continue with you at the table if you want to remain here. Grant?
I'm happy to move the motion. I see no problem with those people who are commissioners. It's procedural. There's no decision to be made here. It's just all you do is accepting it, but it's up to them to make a personal choice. But from the outside, I have no problem.
Can we, but we've got it noted that we just.
It's on the conflicts register, and it can be noted at the start of this item in the minutes that it was discussed and the reasons why it's okay for you to be here. It's been moved. Grant, seconded Jeff. Do you want to say anything, Jeff?
No, I agree. I don't think there's any conflict here whatsoever, personally, and I'm usually pretty anal about that. No problems.
Great. Any further discussion on that? Yes, Grant.
In moving it, I just wanted to reiterate the benefits the commissioner saw, particularly around the rail spur from LPC, which certainly ties into our desire to reduce carbon emissions. So I guess the challenge for us is to ensure in our planning processes that rail link always is maintained and protected and doesn't get chewed away by roads being introduced into that zone. Particularly the absence of Shane, who's a real champion for this, just reiterating that he'd like to see the rail link connect the two ports together eventually, even though it's a spur. So he was very keen to see that happen and wanted me to bring that up, but hugely supportive of the growth of the inland ports in Selwyn.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Thank you. Tab 11, page 151 of today's agenda, the hearing of Council Trades, Waste Bylaw and Wastewater Drainage Bylaw, plural, and recommendation to Council. Murray, welcome along. Do you want to talk us through any highlights in the report?
Just one big highlight. Good afternoon, everybody. Got here just in time. So this is our bylaw hearing report. So just to refresh your memory, we had two bylaws that went through to hearing recently. One was the wastewater bylaw and one was the trade waste bylaw. Both have been through a number of iterations before, and this is just part of its 5-yearly review. We had one submission, and that was regarding the trade waste bylaw, and we resolved all issues prior to the hearing. So it was quite a smooth transition or a smooth process. Helped by our two esteemed councillors. So we had Shane Epiha and Councillor Sophie McInnes here. So perhaps they might want to say some words or two, but it was a really smooth process, and it's just a matter of formalities really now.
Sophie, is there anything you'd like to add?
Nothing in particular, to be honest. It was a pretty simple process, really. Most of it Murray managed to sort out with the submitter initially, before we'd even gotten to the table, and then it was just a lot of it was just punctuation and changing a couple of words around to make it clearer, and yeah, that was a really good process.
Great. So A and B amends the trade waste bylaw is for the bylaw submissions committee recommendations, and B amends the wastewater drainage bylaw as per the bylaw submissions committee recommendation. Mover and seconder. Thank you, Sophie and Mark. Any further discussion, Grant?
I just wonder if you could provide some clarity on page 152 about the charging mechanism for permitted discharges. It says it's based on the cost of treating standard wastewater. is that the assumption that permitted discharges is of a composition the same as domestic waste, and there's no additional charges to us to treat it? Because seeing it's coming from industrial area, just seeing that maybe the discharge might have been different. So can you just confirm that for us?
Yeah, so what we had is, I suppose at one extreme we have the big industries which have huge volumes of waste and some nasty stuff in it, and there's a large formula which we work through to work out the charge. At the other end of the spectrum, we have things which are technically trade waste but don't have any worse outcome than a domestic connection. So things like a travel agent or an accounting firm, they're not a typical residential, and so having to make them go through this large cumbersome equation wasn't really realistic. So basically what we were saying is, as long as it's really just a washroom, a toilet, it's domestic in nature. Some hairdressers may fall into that category as well, and this permitted discharge is up to 5 cubic meters, so it is really small scale. So it's just to speed that process up.
Thank you. Any further questions? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Declare it carried. And we move on to tab 12, which is on page 276 of today's report, the Water's Monthly Update.
Okay, so I'll make a start on that. So the first part is on page 263, and it's a 3 waters reform, which is subject to a separate report, which will come later in the agenda, so I'm not going to speak any more on that. Over the page, I've just given a wee bit of an account. We had an application to Karangaora, which was declined, and just some words around that about, we had a debriefing meeting with them just to understand why that was. There's around 200 applications were made, and the applications total of $5 billion. There's only $1 billion available, so I suppose you had a 1 in 5 chance of getting anything. From the 200 applications, 84 have gone through to the next stage, which they'll be whittled down again. So I suppose, yeah, from quite a large number and large amount of money requested, it's sort of gone down. The final paragraph talks a little bit more about some applications. So one was around travel distance from amenities. The Selwyn South pump station, those residential areas are slightly further away from our town centre than perhaps some of the other developments that were requested for. There's some uncertainty around the plan changes. As a council, we know that the plan changes, well, we actually know, be careful what I say here, but we're going through a process of plan changes, and the assessors saw that as a high risk. So because the plan changes are yet to be approved or declined, because of that, they saw this funding as a high risk. So those are the main reasons why we didn't progress through. The next item is water demand management. And I have a few attachments to talk to first. So the first is on page 268. And this was the state of the nation at the time I wrote the report. It has changed a wee bit since then. But on there's a picture of 3 New Zealands. One is a historic average of water deficit in the soil. The one in the middle is what it looked like this time last year, and the one on the right-hand side is what it looks like now. So I looked online just before I came to the meeting, and some of that green is now turning to yellow. As we all know, it's starting to dry out, but we have had sort of consistent rainfall up until now. So we are a lot greener than what we have been previously, or what we were last year, but we're sort of tracking around the same as what we were on the average basis. I've also included in this agenda some graphs. So they start on page 269 and carry on to the next page. Is that okay? Different agendas, yep. So we'll keep that updated on a monthly basis. At this stage, the groundwater table hasn't started to decline, except for one bore, which is in West Melton, that has shown a slight trend on the downward side. But groundwater levels compared to historically are reasonably high compared to perhaps sort of 5 or so years ago when we had some particularly low groundwater levels. So we're looking good at this stage in terms of groundwater, but we'll update that on a monthly basis. In terms of water demand management, I've got in there a table levels 1 to 4 of our restrictions that we impose when we head into summer. We haven't actually had water restrictions since 2014, I think, which is it's pretty good. We start off probably around December with some education campaigns, and we're sort of promoting a level 1 as a base point for the education campaign. So that's saying, actually, let's not water our lawns when everybody else is trying to do their dishes and put their kids through the bath, not the cars, through the kids through the bath. Let's try and buffer that by doing irrigation late at night or early hours of the morning. So that's our education campaign. We have a number of triggers, and if they meet, then we'll put water restrictions on to try and limit demand. These are really light water restrictions. A lot of councils will go straight through to no lawn watering from the outset. Ours is actually just do it at different times of day. Level 2 is watering, is on alternative days, and then level 3 is when we hit no lawns and then into gardens. So it's very light in terms of water restrictions, but that's how we do it here. And the last thing I'll just mention is that as part of the long-term plan, we did decide to lift the volumetric charge at a greater rate than the base charge. And so this year, the water rate has gone from 50 cents per cubic metre to 60 cents, which is still incredibly cheap. But that is to try and provide the mindset of more value for water. So I think that is from me, and I'll pass over to Elaine to talk about water race closures.
Thank you. So water race closures, so staff are working through the 11 water race closures approved by council last month, and they're working with the affected landowners. It's hoped to undertake the hearing on for 3 sections of water race to be considered before the end of the year. So staff are just in the process of confirming a suitable date for that. The Darfield to Pines pipeline, good steady progress is being made on the Darfield to Pines treatment plant pipeline, with approximately 6 kilometres of pipe laid to date, and with a good supply of pipeline on site, and lay rates continuing to improve across the 5 crews that we now have on site. And at Pines, so we've got the section on the operational health check review. So back in 2018, after a biosolids disposal issue at Pines, we undertook an operational health check that was conducted by external consultants and had the purpose of undertaking an independent review at the treatment plant to ensure good processes and management, and position Pines for future growth. This gave a number of recommendations on the operations and health and safety, which have now been implemented into the plant. So we're now at the point that we're undertaking an updated operational health check to take a proactive look at Pines treatment plant going forward and its operations and how we continue to move in the right direction. War Consulting have been engaged to undertake the review, and this is being led by Hugh Blake Manson and supported by Apex Environmental, and is in conjunction with SCC staff and Cyclone staff. So this includes reviewing the old review, looking at implementation and considering potential plant and process optimizations, as well as considering expanding operations and new projects that we're currently looking at to facilitate the growth in Rolleston and those places that feed into Pines. The review is also considering the expedited growth, because we're developing a lot faster than potentially we expected, and how we can support the plant during that period until future infrastructure is constructed. So once we've finished the review, we'll bring the findings and any recommendations back to council. I think that's us. If you've got any questions.
Yes, we have Nicole, Sophie and Mark.
Thanks for that. Just the water demand management piece on, so we've got the different levels that potentially we have, and my mention of how we increased the volumetric charge with the last LTP. And as part of that discussion, which talked about, you've got here, normally uses an education campaign as a recommendation based on restriction level 1. Well, as part of us putting that volumetric charge up, we were talking about like education on having gardens that use less water and these sorts of things. Are we doing that? Are we putting that out? Because I mean that's a big step as well to be looking at, because then they don't need to be using this water as well.
Yeah, no, certainly. And I do remember going to meetings at West Melton when that was developing, because that went from 30 lots, I think, in West Melton, the original township, out to 600 in a very short period of time after the earthquakes. And was talking to the committee then about, well, if you are going to establish gardens, let's put some water, low water tolerant plants in the ground. So, yep, no, that's definitely something we can consider.
Yeah, and it's also having like mulch and stuff like that, so the water stays in instead of evaporating, and obviously not watering your grass as much, as then it's more tolerant, and sort of messaging like that would be good out there. Thanks.
That's a good idea. Thanks.
Quickly following on from Nicole's, you made me think, maybe that's worth connecting in with our strategic partner of Lincoln Envirotown, because they're probably in a better position to run some kind of workshop around, less water intensive gardening. But my question was kind of on the same, I think the levels that you've got listed in there, it's kind of niggling on the words, but level 1 and level 2, when you're describing the hours that people should or shouldn't be, I've heard it said that it can be quite confusing to understand what time you're allowed to. And literally those 2 first bullet points in both of them, they say the same hours, but in a slightly different way, in a way that makes it sound like they're reversed until you switch your brain on and think, actually, no, it's the same hours, it's just alternate days. So I guess clarification on what the hours actually are, but using the same words. And we've got garden watering, but is that like with a watering can, with a hose, with a sprinkler? It's like people have really different ideas of what these words mean. So
no, that's good advice. We'll definitely tidy that up. There's also sort of irrigation clock that we published as well. I'm not sure they're in the papers in the past, but it sort of clearly shows the timeframes when you can do different activities. Yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you for including the graphs, the water levels, the well water levels, because I think they're really interesting figures to see that we're a little bit ahead of where we were last year. And some wells not a great deal ahead, but most of the wells are considerably further higher in water levels than we were 2 years ago. And I think it's actually important for the community to have some idea of where we stand, where these levels are, because they are an indicator of what might come through the summer. And we've had what would appear to be a reasonably moist winter, and so the groundwater levels are actually relatively good. And so thank you for that information. It's actually of value.
Yeah, we'll just add actually that in my experience, nature always balances itself out. So we have had a bit of a wetter period, but that would normally follow by something that's a bit drier. So just to warn you that times may be coming which are drier than what they are now. Yeah. Sorry.
I have 3 questions, if you wouldn't mind. The first one, I'm really pleased you're doing the operational health check of Pines. In Deborah's absence, so I'm sure she'd be thrilled to see that happening as well. One of the things, of course, that's topical at the moment is the Christchurch fire. Will that operational check look at the risk factors of our own plant to say with a what if question, if that happened here? I mean, when I've been there, it's very concrete orientated. Our plant doesn't seem to be a fire risk, seems to be low, but perhaps you could just provide some reassurance to our ratepayers that if the what if question happened, could we continue to flush the toilet, and how would we manage that situation? So maybe that's for a future date rather than answering it now, but I'll let you have the choice of that. Second question is perhaps just to reaffirm to our ratepayers that the increase from 50 to 60 cents is not a driver of increasing profitability in water. It's a recovery of costs that we are incurring, and a drive to create efficient water use. We're not actually making money off their back. My understanding is that we are still only recouping what we need to keep the business going. I guess that leads on to my third questions about Three Waters, particularly what level or quality of infrastructure should our ratepayers expect under our existing model and under the future model of Three Waters. My personal view is, given our climate in Canterbury, we have a different requirement to the amount of infrastructure that's required in somewhere like the West Coast, where there's a high rainfall. So that part of making sure the infrastructure is correct for our climate and our environment and the expectations of our ratepayers are important. I guess that leads on to my final point around the Kāinga Ora application status. It really concerns me that maybe this is a taste of Salon's future under Three Waters, where we put a very good application in, stressed that we are extremely high growth, but other areas, through lack of investment, we perceive to be a higher priority. So again, I'm concerned for our ratepayers that under Three Waters, this may be what it looks like, where Salon, you're okay, we'll leave you to the back of the queue, and you won't get the infrastructure you need or any assistance. So really concerns me. I mean, we reflect on our shovel-ready projects. We were the only council in Canterbury not to get any funding. And you have to ask the question, do you get penalised for doing the mahi?
So just on the Pines question, that wasn't obviously an initial thing that was getting looked at, but post Bromley, that's definitely something that we can. And as you mentioned, Pines and Bromley are very different, and we do mainly have concrete structures, but definitely something that we can come back on.
I can add to that. You're right. It is all concrete. We don't have enclosed structures at this time, so quite different, the risk profile there. In terms of the charge for water use, it is, there's no profit made there. The money we bring in from water revenue goes into the water account. It's not spread out anywhere different, and we are purely recovering costs through that. So the option was to increase the base charge at a large amount, but we decided to increase the volumetric charge to provide that extra benefit. And I think you're right, when we come to transition into the new water entity, we need to make sure that we can speak into what those level of services are that we require for our ratepayers into the future.
Just on following on from the fire question, and if Deborah was here today, she'll be raising Taitapu with us, and that's a community that still discharges wastewater into the city. From an operations point of view, I guess I would have expected that there'd be a phone call, an alert, something saying, something's not right down the line. Even if you don't need to do anything now, but just a bit of a heads up. So just wondering about the relationship that we have in our agreements with Christchurch City for them to take our wastewater. And if it had been a whole lot worse and they had to switch that off, what is our ability to continue to care for Taitapu's ability to flush the toilet? Because just because you've got a contract with someone else doesn't mean we relinquish our responsibility to care for that community. So you've probably given some thought over the last couple of days around those things, but can you just talk through those?
Yeah, I can give it a go. And Elaine can fill in anything I miss or correct me where I'm wrong. We have I think we have a good relationship with Christchurch City Council, and I suppose in terms of capacity, the only time we've ever had any issues was post earthquakes, where we were asked to actually to stop discharge, and then we actually discharged through to the Halls or River. So that's the only time we've ever been asked to stop the discharge. Regards to this plant, Taitapu really is a drop in the ocean compared to the quantum that Christchurch has. So I don't think they'll even be thinking about Taitapu at this time. Going forward, though, in the long-term plan we have, and it's right at the end of the long-term plan, towards the end of the 10 years, we have got budget, I should say, to look at piping Taitapu up through to Lincoln and then through to Pines so that we are fully self-sustained. Whether that will happen now in the future because of the Three Waters reform, I don't know, but Council has started that process to look at pumping wastewater from Taitapu to Lincoln and potable water from Lincoln through to Taitapu. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I don't believe Christchurch will be contacting us to tell us to switch off Taitapu. It's just such a small demand compared to the rest of the city.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'd given some consideration after seeing what's happened at Bromley to our wastewater treatment plant. I guess for me, the biggest fear is an electrical failure. Fire in the switchboard there would be the event that could cause us the most grief. And I know we have a backup generator, but that's the only assurance I'd want, that how easy it is if the switchboard gear blew up, can we get around that and keep it working, because we're heavily reliant on functioning electricity there for the pumps and all the rest of the machinery. So that's the bit that I think probably is at most at risk for us. Don't need an answer today, but just at some point in the future, some assurance that there is a plan B if switchboards. We have an electrician in the room and might comment about the liability of our switchboards from time to time of blowing up, and that we have other alternatives. But I think that we're fortunate that ours would appear to be a much more robust design in general.
Yeah, and a lot newer too. But no, we can come back and talk about that. The resilience of the plant. Yeah.
I turned it off, but just when Mark did raise it, it raised one of the things that has been in the past about one of the highest risks for us in the Pines is actually a wind event blowing over our pivots, not being able to actually put the water to ground. So I'm not sure whether that's still in the risk factors or not, but we do see that out on the plains periodically where you get a whole lot of pivots overturned. And the last wind event in North Canterbury particularly overturned a significant amount of pivots. And if that was to happen to us, we'd still be receiving the water, but we wouldn't have any pivots to sprinkler on the ground with, which is significant.
Thank you for the report through to us. Do we have a mover and second already for this report? I don't know if we have. Malcolm and Jenny. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? To declare it carried. And the next item, thanks Elaine and Murray. And the next item continues the Three Waters theme. It's an update following, it's really a holding paper after the decision made by the government last week, and keen to allow some space for that discussion today. I think that there is a need for us to have a concerted effort and thought through the opportunities that are still left in front of us around influence over the final outcome. And the decision last week has asked for a working group to be set up that would include focusing on governance, representation and accountability. I think those are three areas that they could change the shape of what has been put before us, particularly in the governance space where there seems to, or there is a lot of pushback to things being removed so far away from those that own the system and having any authority or control over it, as well as that accountability that sits in there as well. There's been two different ways of governance that have been raised over the last 12 months, and I don't think either of them have really been given due consideration to meet the government's requirements around being at arm's length from councils and meeting the threshold for being able to borrow the 800% that the government needs them to. The first one is a joint CCO model, which councils are very used to working with CCOs and with joint CCOs. The balance sheet separation is the only test under the work that's has undergone so far where it doesn't meet the threshold. I think that there are ways to get around that, and if we were to look at a joint CCO model, it would mean that you start thinking about shareholding, you start thinking about influence, you start actually having ownership that reflects a more real world ownership model rather than joint ownership, which I don't, it's kind of, it'll be written into legislation, but I don't think really captures where people feel that they've got something tangible for their asset. And the second has been raised by Entity B and is in some of their working that they've gone through, and that is around a Fonterra type model, a cooperative model, which in brief would show that they would still want to see the accountability of iwi and councils, creating shortlists for people to sit on a shareholders representative board, so that there's some, well, you look through the lens of what you need, skills matrix, relevant experience, and geographical spread, if that's so desired. Then the councils and iwi would narrow that list down and finalise a list for election, and the elections would take place in a similar way to elections at large across everyone that owns the assets as they do now. So communities would continue to own the asset, and you would vote in a similar way to the DHBs that come in now. Instead of the DHBs, though, where anyone can put their hand up and it's a bit of a lolly scramble as to who ends up being there, you're only going to get people that have been through a pre-vetting and are supported by your elected council and iwi. So I haven't given a whole lot of thought to that one in particular. It was raised with me a couple of days ago, and Entity B is looking into that. But I think it just raises the question around the ability for us to influence what that governance outcome looks like, and rather, it's hard in a meeting like this to give it a whole lot of thought when I'm just landing some thoughts on you. But I think that either the working party that we did have set up, or the whole council, if you would like to, should give some thought into how we want to press into governance, representation and accountability. Maybe there's one of those that we care about more than the others. Maybe there's all of them that we want to put some ideas forward. And the reason for doing that would then be to ask those that get appointed to the working group to answer our unresolved questions that sit in here, and to provide some thinking and to get some feedback for our community. Most of the calls that I've received since the government's announcement have been in the negative and are not wanting this change. I note that yesterday's Selwyn Times had a bit of a mixed view around some people feeling like it has got some benefits, but I do think that there's more work to be done, and while that door's open, we should press into it. So keen to hear back what you'd like to do. It won't be able to be on a Wednesday, just the way that Wednesdays are for the next wee while, but next week we would need to find some time, or in the next 2 weeks anyway. This matter's going to tick on, and I'd like us to be involved with some influence if we can. Mark.
Thank you. I'll move that we receive the report and the agenda. I'd like it to be open to all councillors rather than have a subset, a working group or a subcommittee. If it has to be on a non-Wednesday and not all can attend, then so be it. But at least it should be open to all of us to attend, sort of in a briefing type environment. This is probably the most critical and important thing for our community, and the effect it will have on our district. You know, the transfer of these assets and the associated implications. And so I think that it behooves us all, if we can take part in it, to do so, because of its such importance, you know, both fiscally to our district, but also strategically. You know, quality reticulated water, wastewater and stormwater is vital. And we've seen some scurrilous advertising from the government to date, making all sorts of horrific implications about the level of service delivery that we provide. And I think we need to be working as a team to get the best outcome on behalf of our ratepayers, to make the best submission on behalf of our ratepayers. And so I'd like to see us all have the opportunity to participate in that process, because it just is so important.
Are there any grants?
I support what you're saying, Mark. I perhaps would like a moment in PX. I think there's some issues that should be said in public excluded. I was concerned as well. I listened to an interview by Minister Mahuta on Three Waters transfer yesterday. She made some sweeping generalisations, which again, Mark, fall into the category of what could only be described as spin. That there'd been there'd been 2 decades of underinvestment, which again may be partially true, but not in the whole. One of the most, I think, disturbing comments she made, which was a slur on all councillors in local government, was that councillors were focused on re-election chances rather than the issue. I took personal offence at that. I think a lot of councillors in New Zealand would also feel very, very aggrieved to have that scurrilous allegation put against their name. So her estimation, in my view, went down significantly with that comment. She sidestepped into council equity by playing the rural card and saying that we should all help our rural cousins out, and when you went on holiday to the beach you would expect fresh water. Yes, we do, but it doesn't mean that people who should have provided infrastructure should get away without pulling their socks up. Natural justice certainly seems to be lacking that. When Sam, you talked about alternatives, that was put to Minister Mahuta. She replied, the councils have had 4 years of consultation to put up viable alternatives and none have been forthcoming. Again, a gross generalisation and doesn't take account into the work that has been put in good faith. So I guess that leaves us where we are, and whether we accept the government's position, which I'm interested to hear the LGNZ and the wider local government group as to whether they are just going to roll over like your pet dog and say, take our toys away, or whether there is going to be a sustainable challenge to what's been put forward. But from our own space, I think there's 2 work streams, as Sam said, around governance, representation and accountability. But there's also a really focus driven internally, if we do to accept that this is the future, what the mechanics are, particularly around looking at our LTP, our transition and the opportunities that this provides us to actually get our infrastructure in the next 2 years up to speed, even faster than we have been. So I guess I'm interested in option number 2, and I'd like to discuss that in PX, please, Your Worship.
Yep, we can do that. Any further comments people would like to make? So I'll work with staff around some timings for an initial discussion. I think having all councillors involved is it's open to everyone. It's not going to be on a Wednesday, so I understand that timing might not work. And next week, I'm cycling from Arthur's Pass to Taumutu, so it takes out 3 days of the week. Sorry, but we will look to schedule that probably early in the new week. Mark, you moved the receiving of this report. Seconder for that. Malcolm, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. The next item is document signed and sealed. This is on page 288. It's mover and seconder for those. Thanks, Jenny. Seconded Malcolm. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Move to resolution to exclude the public. Mover, thank you, Malcolm and Nicole. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. And we'll adjourn the meeting and allow things to stop. We'll come back at 2:30 for